Hi, Rachel. So
Hello.
nice to have you.
It's so great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, I'm so excited for this. So tell us about your journey as an artist. What inspired you to become a professional artist?
I've always kind of known that in my bones I wanted to be an artist from a young age. I always kept doodling little motifs of mountains and rivers and trees, and I'm just really inspired by nature. I was very fortunate to have super supportive family that encouraged me to pursue art. Even from, I remember my very first artist easel. Like I loved that easel and, would still have it to this day if, I didn't grow up. Um, I've always been inspired by landscapes, went to school for art, studied, art like we do, and really love landscapes, just like nature and all that, until I discovered abstract expressionism. And I've really connected, like there was a whole new world that opened up to me when I discovered abstract. So I did abstract for a while and then came back around to do this sort of like rainy abstracted landscape, which kind of brings around full circle of the landscape and nature and also abstract. In between all of that, I worked multitude of different jobs. I was a graphic designer. I worked two or three different jobs and just trying to, within all of that busyness, to still craft creative time and time to paint, even if it was just, one painting every 6 months for a time because things were, a little crazy. Um, but lately I've launched on my own over the last couple years, and now I'm doing art and painting, teaching art and stuff full time. So I'm very excited that my long and meandering journey of art has brought me to this point.
I love that. That's so beautiful. And I love how you said your parents and family were supportive. That doesn't always happen. And I think it's such a gift when that does happen. And look where you are now. And, people ask me, where do you meet all these people that you interview? And I met you through an art exhibit that we did in Rome. And it was just so lovely to get to know all the different artists from the
Well,
United States. Yeah. Um, Exhibiting there and just seeing your work in person. And I always say this about the different artists I meet, seeing it in person is a much different experience than seeing it on video or in on social media and
yeah.
seeing the pictures. And I always encourage people to go out and see the work, go see it in person because it's
Oh,
a different energy.
it is.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely it is. And likewise with your work. I loved seeing it in person. I mean, I love all the things you post on in general in your social media, but like being able to see it in person, like the texture, the light, the luminosity, the energy. Yeah, it's you can't replace online art with in-person art.
No, not at all. Was there anyone that inspired you to become an artist?
I would say if I had to choose one person, it was my junior high art teacher, Mrs. Wojciechowski. She always said, pronounce it as watch your house keys. So Mrs. Wojciechowski, but it's really fast with a Rhode Island accent. And I took art lessons from her, and she was, I went to a public school, so she taught all of the art classes. And there was just a really amazing energy and a really amazing vibe. And the passion that she had for her students was tangible, and the love that she had for art. And just she was so warm and nurturing and amazing. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I want to be an artist or an art teacher or something in the arts. And if I could be just like one small micron of the artist and art teacher that Mrs. Wojciechowski is, I would be content for life. And actually, since then, she and I have actually reconnected, and we've actually exhibited together
Oh,
a handful of times. I actually had lunch with her the other day and went to one of her exhibits. And so it's really amazing to be able to come back around and reconnect. And the
yeah.
person who inspired me to be an artist, she even says like I'm inspiring her too. Like we're going back and forth about art exhibits and like how our work has changed. And she actually came to my very first art exhibit of the rain paintings about 5 years ago, and she's like super proud, and I was super proud. And it's really been amazing to be able to keep that connection, and that inspiration, and now mutual inspiration, with her. Now she tells me to call her Mary, so I have to remember not to just be like Mrs. Wadja, I mean Mary. Be mutually inspired by one another and to build one another up, where, now as adults, and I'm grown up, that came all the way from me being a dorky middle schooler and to a teacher and being inspired by her in art class. So yeah, it continues going.
What a full circle moment. And I always say you never know who you're going to inspire, who you're going to affect, even if it's that one person, because then you're going to go inspire so many other people. And that's one of the reasons why I do these podcasts, because you just never know
Yeah.
and what effect you're going to have. Oh, that's so special. I love that story. Oh, wow.
Okay.
You have a series of work that represent rain and rainy days. What is the meaning behind those pieces? What do they mean to you?
So I have, plain and simple, I've always been obsessed with rainy days. I've always loved the sensory experience of the smell of rainy days, the feeling of rainy days, going for a walk in the rain, the sound of rainy days. I've just always loved it. I think when I started doing this series, and I started with wanting to portray something that people think as gray and gloomy and sad. And I've always been sort of a little bit of an optimist, and sort of wanting to see a little bit of beauty in the unexpected places where people don't necessarily think that rainy days are great. I mean, a lot of people do. I've met so many people since I've started doing that are like, I love rainy days too. And I'm like, high five. But as a general sort of thing, a lot of people think of rain as doom and gloom and sad and wet. And so I started this series, about 5 years ago, just wanting to highlight the colors. Sometimes on a rainy day, the colors are more saturated. It obscures our vision, as the rain is running down the window pane. So we kind of have to let go of having a perfectly realistic expectation of what our vision is through that window. And then just having different windows into places that we can imagine ourselves. So that was kind of the early part of doing rain, 5 years ago, was that showing a different side of it. And I think over the course of these 5 years, it definitely has evolved in how I connect with it and why I do it, with the times, with what I'm going through personally. Lately, I've been finding a more of, in today's increasingly chaotic world, that people and myself, people need a place to breathe. People need a place for calm and contemplation, and a means to just sort of escape the moment sometimes. The world is uncontrollable and chaotic and calamitous, and all crazy C words. And I have found through this painting process and through rain that, to create a small calm corner, a small calm colorful corner, if you will, that people can just kind of escape for a minute, breathe, and imagine. Sort of, there is something about rain, I feel like it kind of puts a dampening effect sound wise on everything, and it kind of forces us to pause, whether we like it or not.
Yes.
And I think we could be mad about that pause, or we can take that pause as sort of a granted gift, like this is a moment we weren't planning on, but we have to live in this moment, and we can breathe in this moment. And so that is one of the dimensions of rain that I've discovered over time. And then also the process itself of actually making these paintings, is a lot about creating something beautiful and then destroying it, and then trying to recraft or redesign something else beautiful out of that process, while all the whole time wanting to regain control of what the original thing was, but letting go, but wanting to return to it and regain control, and and then letting it go. Because what, in today's world, we want to control things, we want to have the predictable, we want to have the routines and the things that we know are gonna turn out, and we can't. And so this process of rain, I literally, I've been doing it a while. I've developed this as my own technique. I don't think I know of anyone else that does it in this particular way. And even though I started it, I still have no idea where the painting's going to go. And there's something freeing about that. There's something entirely crazy about that too, because I can't control every single individual drip. But it's constantly letting go. And through the rain, to me, it's a reminder that beautiful things can come when we let go. And
Let
every
go.
painting is a reminder to myself of that.
Oh, I love that quote. Beautiful things can come when we let go. And,
Mhm.
when you were talking about that, it reminded me of everything that happened during quarantine and COVID and how
Yes.
there was that pause.
Yes.
And for a lot of people, it was difficult to go through that pause. And for a lot of people, they're like, oh, I love this. I can breathe, like I needed this.
Mhm.
So I just love that symbolism and what it represents. And I used to not like the rain, as a kid, but now I love it, when I see, because we need it. I live in California and
Oh,
LA, and
yeah. Definitely
it's
need
so
it there.
needed. And so whenever it rains, I'm like, yes, this is amazing. And then the fresh air afterwards. And then that's why I love talking to artists, because artists see things differently,
Yes.
and you're seeing excuse me, rain in such a different way, and you're turning it into art, and that is just, it's poetic. It's like there's something so that doesn't seem that like I don't know, I never just thought of painting rain, or looking at your work makes me look at, for example, the rain on my windshield when I'm driving. It reminds me of you. Like, I'm like, yeah, I could see Rachel painting something like this, or like just outside my window. And I think that's what, as artists, we want to do. We want to have people remember us through something very specific.
Yes. If I always tell myself that if I can help one person see a rainy day in a slightly different perspective, I've done my job. So high five from you.
Yes, good job. Yes, absolutely. You have for me. Um, did you have any fears or limiting beliefs in becoming an artist?
Oh boy, did I ever. Yes. I think what artist doesn't, if you don't, are you still human or are you a robot? Um, I
Yeah.
have always had those, I think a lot of artists have that same feeling of like, oh, I can't actually be an artist. I have to do another job that's in another field or another industry, because being an artist isn't a real job. Like, unless, you do this or that. And so I think that was a limiting thought for a long time, even though I had a super supportive family and a super supportive like circle group and friends. I think there's still like sort of like culturally or regionally, where, I'm in New England. I think there's very much a stereotype of like they're super practical New England, or like no frills, like just get it done, put your nose to the grind, and work hard. And that if you're an artist, you're obviously not working hard, right? Because you're just having a beautiful hobby. But no, I know, Sheryl, as you know, making art is hard work, and being an artist and doing art as your business and as your life, it is hard work, let me tell you. So I think that's always been sort of that sneaky in the back of the of my mind, limiting thought that, is this a real thing? Well, yes, it's a real thing. Art is an industry, and there's people in the art industry all the time, and then there's peripheral art jobs and art careers that are not specifically a painter. Like there's so many things that use art and use design, and I wish that we learn that more. And I think in today's education, more and more students and people, humans, are learning more that the possibilities are much broader than we ever anticipated for artists. I think if there's another limiting thought, I think it's the imposter syndrome
Mm.
that lurks over my shoulder. That there's always that feeling of, am I really good enough to do art? Is my art really good enough? Is what I'm making going to be meaningful to others? And like, what's the point? Like sometimes it's like, what the point? What am I doing this for? And what I love about even having that imposter syndrome is that the answers to my imposter syndrome are sometimes answered just in talking to people at the art shows or at galleries where my art is exhibited, or some of my students, because I teach private art lessons and events, and they'll come to me, even perfect strangers, and be like, your art really moves me. Or, I was having a crazy hectic day and I walked by your booth, and your art really just exuded a calm and the colorfulness, like, just, can I just sit down here for a few minutes and, take it all in? And so it's things like that that really help to validate or stomp out some of the imposter syndrome, and that whole, like, is art, a real thing? Yes, it's a real thing. But I think a lot of those self-doubt and limiting thoughts are not unique just to me, but I think that it's something that as artists we are always trying to fight against, and always trying to reaffirm ourselves through the work that we do, and through connections to the humans that see our art, and to the other, artists that we can help to build one another up and reinforce our abilities and our capabilities, and stomp out all these limiting thoughts along the way.
Oh, yes, I agree. That's beautifully said. Has art healed you in any way?
Um, that is a loaded question for me, but in a good way. The short answer is yes. Art has healed me. For me, just the act of moving a brush daily, or, if it's not daily, whenever I do get to it, because we get busy, there is something just very connecting about moving a brush in some sort of liquid medium that is just therapeutic on its own. For me, I have the process of creating a beautiful thing out of all of these start as dots, like a very, very fine and tedious pointillism painting that takes a lot of time to work on. And so I battle against sort of anxiety and control by wanting to wipe this painting out entirely. And like I was saying, that the unpredictability of the process and the unpredictability of rain. So healing wise, like, fighting against that and constantly trusting the process of that letting go, and of letting literally the paint go, while still tempering the paint and still being involved in the process. Because there's a lot of, once I let the paint drip, it doesn't just free drip all by itself for like days and days. Like, every hour, every couple hours, I actually take a paintbrush. I don't have them right here, but a very small paintbrush, and I'm actually painting up against gravity. I'm actually painting upwards, to blend all of the paint back up on the canvas and bring out the paint that's sort of moved around. And so through that process of creating something that I destroyed and then creating something out of that, that is healing in itself, because it's allowing me to come to terms with what this turns out. So sort of like mental health wise, and sort of just anxiety wise, allowing the literally to go with the flow, while also controlling the flow and modifying the flow,
Yes.
but to temper the flow. And on a much sort of deeper, more personal, more recent level, art has been healing. Okay, sorry. My in All right. Um, Within the last year or two, both my husband and I, both of our fathers died within months of one another.
Sorry.
And so through that, it was a really hard time. It continues to be. Grief is a hard monster, and that lurks behind paintings and places we don't expect to find it. And so that time was really hard. I gave up painting for a number of about at least about a year and a half, just to
Wow.
assist with, care and logistics, and also just mourning and grieving. Like, I didn't feel like painting, and also the place where I was painting this studio, for the time my father, because it was cancer for him, that he came to live with us for a short time. He actually used my studio here as his little office. And so there was a lot of memory wrapped up in this space, which was formerly my creating space. And so I had to really come to a place where I was finally okay entering this room again. And almost like reclaim it as my creative art making space again, because there was so much that had become exclusively associated with my father being in this room in his last days. And so out of that, when I did start painting again, and setting an intention to paint and be regular about it, and even on days I wasn't feeling like painting, just to be able to move the brush and create something. I just started small. I started with little paintings, and the very first painting I did after through that grief was just the tiniest little painting. It was just black and purple. It's very much not in style with what these are, but it was still a rain one. And it was just getting out a lot of that sort of grief and feeling. And more recently, in the last, at the end of the summer, I actually finished creating a series of 12 paintings that I'm calling The Skies Cried as My Fathers Died. And it is a series of rain paintings that work out some of my grief through memory while still celebrating joy and beauty in the storm of their lives. And it's not directly figurative, it still alludes to landscape and sky, but the idea that when we're going through really hard times, when we're going through grief, when we have a sick loved one, we look to the skies for escape. We look for meaning. We look for the star. We look for a higher power. We look sometimes in anger. We're like, what is going on? And so through those paintings, when I finally got them out of my system, it was very, very difficult to work through them. But I did them on an art residency. So I was out of my normal situation, and I was in the beautiful woods of Maine just to
Wow.
work on them. And when they were finally out of my system, there were a lot of crying. There was a lot of tears that literally mixed with the
Sure.
paint on that particular canvas, on those canvases. But once they were out of my system, I literally felt like I could breathe again, and like I had a huge weight lifted up off of my shoulders after creating them. And then since then, I'm kind of just doing like very small previews to like family and a couple collectors here and there. And I'm looking at potentially like showing them to the public a little bit later in 2023 in a gallery setting. But of those that have seen them, because it was they're very close to my heart. But of those that
Sure,
have seen them,
yes.
they have said that it helped them to sort of see some expressions in of grief that they've gone through themselves, or finding that sort of beauty and joy in the storm, even if it's a storm we never wanted to find ourselves in.
Yeah.
And so, sorry, that was a very long circular answer to has art healed me. That process of putting my grief and mourning into the form of paint that I could face, and that was right here in front of me, and then be able to then feeling compelled to share it with others that went through similar processes, has been very healing, because then it also provides a conversation for connection between me and those others of family or friends or others that have gone through difficult times, and see themselves maybe in some of these storms or these really dark rain clouds, but they still trying to seek what is the small moment that we can't control the storm, but are the small moments that we can still choose joy in the storm, or still see some small beauty. It might be bittersweet, and it might be still difficult, but what is it that we can see? What are the colors of that takes? So yeah, how art has been invaluable for helping me heal in lots of different ways through these paintings.
Thank you for sharing that. I know it's a vulnerable space to be. I lost my father in December of 2017.
Mm.
And I completely understand that feeling and that grief. And it takes a while. And
Yeah.
art did help me through that. And then exactly a year later from the day he had passed, I was in Rome with you. And so it was like a sign for me from him, because I feel like they do send us signs and they're
Yeah.
communicating with us. And
Yeah.
so it was just such a validation for me that you're on the right path and I'm here for you. And, he
Yeah.
was always very supportive. So
Yeah.
I always talk about the importance of expressing whatever it is you're going through, even if it might not be pretty,
Yeah.
it might
Absolutely.
not be pretty perfect.
Yeah. It's still authentic and it's
It's
still valid.
yes, and it's coming from your heart and you're just letting out all of those feelings that are stuck inside you. And what better way than in a creative process,
Yeah.
whether it's painting or playing an instrument
Or
or, I'm sorry.
gardening.
I was just going to say that gardening. I love gardening.
I
So
did a little too.
yeah, or cooking. I mean, it's just creativity comes in so many different shapes and forms. So I always talk about the importance of just express yourself, express whatever it is that's going on inside of you, let it out. So that's it's important that you shared that. So thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for bringing it up so I could share it.
Yes, wonderful. What words of wisdom do you have for all the creative spirits out there?
Words of wisdom. Stay true to your heart. Despite what your brain says, despite what the world might say, feel and follow where your heart leads you, artistically or personally speaking. Because if you follow your heart and you listen to your heart, it will lead you to really amazing places. It might lead you to really vulnerable, weird places. But it will also, I think, lend authenticity to your artwork, to yourself as a human. Like, just follow your heart. Um, be gentle with yourself is another words of wisdom, I would say. I'm a very driven person. I like to accomplish a lot. I like to take momentum and build momentum and continue going and take lots of chances when I can. This year for me in art has been like a very big year of risks and chances, and
Mm.
especially after having that year and a half off for all of that stuff. But it's still important to be gentle with yourself in the process. If you need rest, rest. If you need food, goodness, get yourself a sandwich or something. Like, if you need to start small before you accomplish the really big things, start small. On a personal note, since we brought up grief and all of that, after all of that went through and I wasn't painting for a year and a half, I said that I was only painting paintings like 12 by 16, 8 by 10, very small, just to get the brush moving. About a year or so, maybe later from when I started doing that, I had not, this size 30 by 40 is kind of my regular gallery size. Like, I love this size. This is what I started with
Me
5
too.
years
Love
ago.
that space.
And it fits perfectly in the cargo section of my vehicle. It's just this perfect.
Yeah,
And not too big, not too small, but just right.
that's right.
I did not think I could get back to painting this size again,
Mm.
because that's how intimidating it felt to put that much paint on a canvas again after taking this time off and trying to get back to the process. When I worked through the paintings of related to the skies cried as my father's died, those were 12 paintings, and I did 6 other paintings inspired by a trip to Montana, which also has some ties into the father thing. So for the month of August, from July into August, I created 18 paintings in 21 days
Wow.
that were this size.
Wow.
I had not tackled this size since before that. I was working on, the biggest I got to was 16 by 20. So I had not tackled that size since before my father died. And so, what was my original point? Be gentle with yourself.
Be gentle with
Even
yourself.
if you
Yes.
don't know that you'll get there, you will get there eventually. And also challenge yourself. Be gentle with yourself, but challenge yourself when it's appropriate and when you feel like it's a good timing for you to take on that challenge. And for me, the certain things aligned that I was finally able to create those 18 paintings in 21 days, working out, kind of reopening that Pandora's box of emotion that I had kind of let closed, because we have to kind of function. And so to be able to do that, be gentle with yourself, challenge yourself. And also I'd say that my last piece of advice or wisdom is that not everything's going to be a masterpiece, but the process is just as important, if not more, than the final product, because it's through the process that you discover things about yourself, you discover things about the material. Um, and the final product is great, and hopefully it turns out to be a masterpiece eventually, but you have to create a lot of monster pieces before you get to masterpieces.
I love that. You got to create a lot of monster
Monster
pieces.
pieces before you get to masterpieces.
Yes, yes, yes.
Trademark that, yes. That just came to
Absolutely.
me just now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to use that with my students because they're so hard on themselves sometimes with you know, what they're producing. And I'm like, be patient with yourself. It will come.
Yeah.
You're not going to start with the masterpiece, but with the
No,
monster piece.
tell them that Rachel Brask said you
Yes.
work on your monster piece before you get to your
And
masterpiece.
that's okay. And it's going to be, and that's the process. I remember one student said, but I'm not enjoying the process. And I said, but that's okay too.
That's part of the process.
Part of it is getting frustrated. And I mean, that's life and being human.
Yes, absolutely it is.
Yeah.
Might find a different process through being frustrated with that part of the process, and all of that is part of that process continuum.
Oh, that's great. You have so many good quotes in this episode. I love this. So, where can people find you and see your work?
You can find me on Instagram at Brask Studio. You can find me on Facebook as Rachel Brask Studio. And you can find me on my website at www.rachelbraskart.com. Rachel Brask is RACHELBRASK. As I say, Brask is in the middle part of the word Nebraska. So,
Love
and
that.
then the other way is to sign up for my email newsletter on my website to stay connected. I'll usually send out once or twice a month a little video or a little email showing the featured painting of the month and maybe some inspirational quotes about, using monster pieces until they turn into
Yes.
masterpieces.
I love that. Rachel, it's such a pleasure having you here, and you're such a ray of light, and your art is truly, it is calming and just so lovely. And I recommend anyone who's in your area to come see your work in person and experience it in person. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Sheryl. It was great to be here. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.